The rain hit the window like a steady drumbeat, a sound Ethan had grown all too familiar with over the years. It was the soundtrack to his small apartment, a constant rhythm echoing through the silence of a life that seemed to have forgotten the melody of hope. He sat at his desk, his gaze fixed on a half-written email glowing on his computer screen. It was meant to be a resignation letter, but his fingers would freeze every single time he tried to type the words, "I quit. 10 years?" An entire decade spent at the same corporate job. 10 years of feigning interest in meetings, of forcing smiles, of whispering to himself that one day things would get better. But one day was a horizon that never got any closer. His dreams, the ones where he was a writer, a traveler, a person who made a real difference, had slowly faded into the background noise of just getting by. He'd often try to convince himself he was lucky. He had a stable job, right? A roof over his head, a predictable paycheck. But in the quiet moments, a deeper truth would surface. He wasn't living. He was just existing. But that night, something was different. It wasn't some dramatic movie-like moment. There was no lightning strike, no booming voice from the heavens. It was a quiet, almost invisible shift. He caught his reflection in the dark rain-streaked window, and a question formed in his mind, so clear it felt like it was spoken aloud. What happened to me? He saw a man staring back, a man exhausted by his own excuses. A man who kept saying, "someday," while life relentlessly moved on without him. And in that quiet moment of self-reflection, he whispered two words that held the power to change everything. "Enough. I'm done waiting." He erased the resignation letter and instead opened a blank document. He titled it "My New Life." Underneath, he didn't write a grand plan or a list of impossible goals. He just wrote one simple sentence. Do one thing today that the old me wouldn't do. He saved the document, closed his laptop, and for the first time in a long time, the rain didn't sound like a somber drumbeat. It sounded like a cleansing wash, a promise of a fresh start. The next morning didn't magically bring a wave of courage. It brought the familiar jarring sound of his alarm, the bitter taste of the same instant coffee, the suffocating crawl of rush hour traffic. Fear was his co-pilot on the drive to work. But underneath the fear, something small but significant had shifted. It was like a tiny gear in a massive clock had finally clicked into place. He started to truly see the people around him, the tired faces on the subway, the blank, listless stares in the office elevator. They were living reflections of who he had been for so long, alive but not really living. That little voice inside him, the one he had ignored for years, whispered again, louder this time, "If you don't change now, you never will," at his desk. Instead of diving into his usual spreadsheet, he opened that document again. Do one thing today that the old me wouldn't do. He thought about it all morning. The old Ethan would have kept his head down, eaten lunch at his desk, and counted the minutes until 5 o'clock. At noon, he stood up. He walked out of the building, not just for a breath of fresh air, but with a purpose. The rain was still drizzling, dripping from the edge of his cheap umbrella. He found a small, quiet park bench and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. His mother's. His heart pounded as the phone rang. When she answered, her voice was a mix of surprise and concern. "Ethan? It's been so long. Are you okay?" And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he didn't give the standard robotic reply. He let the truth out, raw and unfiltered. "No, Mom, I'm not okay. But I want to be..." The relief of saying those words was immense, like a dam breaking inside him. They talked for over an hour. He told her about the emptiness, the lost dreams, the feeling of being a spectator in his own life. She didn't offer easy solutions or platitudes. She just listened. And at the end of the call, she said, "I'm so glad you called, Ethan. Just remember, it's never too late to find your way back to yourself." That phone call was the first domino. The next day, he signed up for a beginner's creative writing workshop that met on Tuesday nights. The old Ethan would have said he was too tired after work, too busy. The new Ethan just went. He was terrified, surrounded by strangers who seemed so much more talented, so much more confident. But as he started writing, putting words on a page that were truly his, he felt a spark he thought had been extinguished forever. He started using his lunch breaks to explore the city instead of eating at his desk. He discovered hole-in-the-wall bookstores, vibrant street art, and quiet cafes he never knew existed just blocks from his office. He started a journal, not just to write stories, but to document these small moments of discovery, these tiny acts of rebellion against his old life. He was changing his routine, and in doing so, he was changing his perspective. A few weeks later, there was a company-wide email asking for volunteers to lead a small charity drive. It was the kind of email Ethan would have instantly deleted. It meant extra work, public speaking, and coordinating with people from other departments. It was everything his introverted, risk-averse self dreaded. He stared at the email, his cursor hovering over the delete button. He heard that voice again, the one that was becoming his guide. Do one thing the old me wouldn't do. He took a deep breath and hit reply. I'd love to help. Leading the charity drive was one of the most challenging things he had ever done. He fumbled through presentations, felt awkward leading meetings, and stayed late organizing donations. But something incredible happened. He connected with his colleagues in a way he never had before. He saw their passions, their generosity. He wasn't just Ethan from accounting anymore. He was a leader, a motivator. When they exceeded their fundraising goal, the sense of accomplishment was more rewarding than any bonus he had ever received. The changes were gradual. They weren't a seismic overhaul, but a series of small, intentional choices. He was building a new life, not by demolishing the old one in a single day, but by laying one new brick at a time. The writing workshop helped him find his voice. The charity drive helped him find his confidence. The daily walks helped him find beauty in the ordinary. 6 months after that rainy night, Ethan sat at his desk again. He opened a new email. This time his fingers didn't freeze. He typed, "Dear Mr. Henderson, please accept this email as my official resignation." But this time, it wasn't a letter of defeat. It was a declaration of victory. He wasn't running away from something. He was running towards something. He had saved up enough money, and more importantly, he had built up enough courage. He had a plan. He was going to spend the next year traveling, volunteering, and writing not as a vague dream, but as a concrete reality. His last day at the office felt surreal. People he had barely spoken to in 10 years came up to him, not just to say goodbye, but to tell him he seemed different, happier, more alive. They told him he had inspired them. On his way out, he walked past the tired faces he used to see on the subway, but now he saw them differently. He didn't see people who were stuck. He saw people who, like him, might just be one quiet moment of decision away from changing everything. Standing outside, the evening sun breaking through the clouds, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He hadn't found a magical answer or a secret formula for happiness. He had simply learned to listen to that voice inside him, the one that had been whispering for him to live all along. He had learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the act of taking a small step, even when you're terrified. And sometimes the biggest journeys begin not with a giant leap, but with a single whispered word, enough. This story reminds us that change doesn't always have to be a dramatic explosion. It can be a quiet decision, a single step in a new direction. If you feel stuck, remember Ethan. Ask yourself, what is one thing I can do today that the old me wouldn't do? Your new life might be waiting on the other side of that one small choice. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. See you next time. When Ethan opened his eyes the next morning, something felt different. It wasn't that the sun shone brighter or the air smelled fresher. It was that he felt alive again, even if just a little. He had made a promise to himself, and for once, he intended to keep it. That day, instead of walking straight into the office, he took a detour. He stopped by the park where he used to go years ago to think, before life became a blur of bills, deadlines, and missed opportunities. He sat on a bench, his coffee steaming against the cool morning air, and watched joggers pass by. People who looked free, driven, awake. For years, Ethan had envied people like that. He'd called them lucky, but sitting there, he realized they weren't lucky. They just decided. And maybe, just maybe, that's all it took. At 9:37 a.m., Ethan was back at his desk, his heart pounding as his fingers hovered over the keyboard. He opened a blank email. This time he didn't hesitate. He typed, "Dear Mr. Lawson, after much thought, I've decided it's time for me to move on. I'm grateful for everything I've learned here, but I need to take a new direction in my life, one that aligns with who I am and who I want to become. Respectfully, Ethan Cole." He stared at the words for a long time. They felt heavy, real. When he finally clicked send, his whole body trembled. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was freedom. That night, though, the doubts came flooding in. What have I done? What if I fail? What if I never find another job? He sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the resignation confirmation email. And for the first time, he felt the full crushing weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. But then his eyes fell on a quote taped to his fridge. It had been there for years, forgotten beneath grocery lists and old reminders. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Martin Luther King Jr., a small smile spread across Ethan's face. He had just taken that first step. The next morning, he made a plan. It wasn't a grand, life-altering strategy, just a simple list of things that made him feel alive again. Start writing again every day. Exercise, even if it's just a walk. Call old friends. Learn something new. Help someone else, even in a small way. He wrote those words on a whiteboard above his desk, the same desk where he had spent years typing reports that meant nothing to him. This time, the words mattered. Ethan began to write again. At first, the words came out slow, clumsy, and awkward. But after a few days, it was as if the stories inside him had been waiting for years to escape. He wrote about courage, about failure, and about the quiet beauty of starting over. He didn't know if anyone would ever read his words, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't care. He was no longer writing to impress. He was writing to heal. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Ethan started waking up earlier, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He moved more, he smiled more. People started to notice the change. His mother called him one afternoon and said, "You sound different, Ethan. Happier." He laughed softly. "I think I finally remembered who I am, Mom. But it wasn't all sunshine and smooth sailing. Not every day was easy. Some mornings the fear would creep back in, whispering that he wasn't good enough, that he'd made a huge mistake. And each time, he answered that voice with a simple, quiet truth. I'm still trying. And that's enough." The journey wasn't about being fearless. It was about feeling the fear and taking the next step anyway. One night, after finishing a story he was particularly proud of, Ethan decided to post it online. His finger hovered over the publish button, the old anxieties flaring up. But he clicked it. He closed his laptop and walked away, expecting nothing. Within hours, people started responding. Comments flooded in. "This story completely changed my perspective. I really needed this today. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to start over." Ethan sat there in front of the glowing screen with tears in his eyes. He had finally touched a life, not by being perfect, but by being real. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Maybe his purpose wasn't to be successful in the world's eyes. Maybe it was to help others see the success already inside themselves. He hadn't just found his voice. He had found his purpose. And it was more fulfilling than any job title or salary could ever be. He was finally truly awake. And this was just the beginning. Thank you so much for watching. If Ethan's story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire. The months that followed were not what Ethan expected. He thought that once he quit his job and followed his heart, everything would just fall into place. He believed that the universe would magically open doors for him the moment he took that leap of faith. But real change, real growth, it doesn't happen in a straight line. It's messy, it's painful. It's the storm before the sunrise. The online momentum that had once fueled his courage began to slow down. The flood of encouraging comments trickled to a stop. The likes and shares faded away. His blog views, once a source of validation, started to drop. Ethan tried his best to stay positive, to hold on to that initial spark. But the digital silence grew heavier with each passing day. The bills started piling up again, a familiar and unwelcome pressure. His savings, which once felt like a sturdy safety net, now felt more like a countdown clock, ticking away his time. Every morning he'd open his laptop, stare at the blank screen, and a creeping doubt would whisper in his ear, asking if he'd made a terrible, life-altering mistake. "Maybe I wasn't meant for this," he muttered to himself one night, closing his laptop with a sigh of frustration. "Maybe I should have just stayed where I was, safe and secure." But then, in that moment of despair, a clear image flooded his mind. He remembered the version of himself who sat in that sterile, gray office, the man who had a smile ready for everyone but himself. The man who felt hollow, like a ghost walking through his own life. The memory was so vivid, so chilling that he whispered under his breath, "I can't go back there. I just can't." The thought of returning to that life was more terrifying than the uncertainty he was facing now. One evening, as a heavy rain poured outside, mirroring the storm inside him, Ethan found himself sitting on the floor of his small apartment. His laptop was open, the cursor blinking on an empty page. He had written and deleted the same sentence at least 10 times. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt good enough. His gaze drifted around the dimly lit room, landing on the stack of unpaid bills on his desk, and he became acutely aware of the suffocating silence. And then, it hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He had been chasing success again, just in a different disguise. This time, it wasn't the approval of his corporate bosses he was seeking, it was the validation of strangers online. He had told himself he was finally free, but he had only traded one set of chains for another. He had chained himself to a new kind of expectation, a new master in the form of likes, comments, and views. Tears welled up in his eyes and began to stream down his face. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he truly cried. It wasn't a cry of weakness or self-pity, but a cry of release, of letting go. He said softly to the empty room, "I don't want to prove myself anymore. I just want to be me." And with that simple, profound realization, he closed his laptop, turned off his phone, and just let himself sit in the quiet, listening to the rhythm of the rain. Later that night, as the rain softened to a gentle patter and then faded into silence, Ethan picked up a notebook. He wrote something different this time, not a blog post for the world. Not content for an audience, but a few simple words just for himself. "I don't need the world to clap for me to know I'm worth something. Success isn't about being seen. It's about feeling whole." He slept more deeply that night than he had in weeks. The next morning, he woke with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet, steady sense of purpose. He was finally on his own path, walking at his own pace. If you've ever felt lost trying to live up to someone else's expectations, whether it's your boss, your family, or even the faceless crowd online, know that you're not alone. True freedom starts the moment you stop seeking validation from the outside and start listening to the voice within. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more content about finding your own way. Have you ever felt like you're completely lost? Like you've hit rock bottom and there's no way up? I want to tell you a story about a man named Ethan who found himself in that exact place. Ethan was a writer, but the words had dried up. He felt like a failure, a ship lost at sea with no land in sight. His world had gone gray, and every day was just a struggle to get through. One afternoon, needing to clear his head, Ethan went for a walk by the river. The water flowed steadily, indifferent to his turmoil. Then he saw him, a young man sitting on a bench, his head buried in his hands. It was a picture of pure despair, and it was a picture Ethan knew all too well. Something pulled him forward, an instinct he didn't understand. Without a second thought, he sat down on the bench beside the stranger. The young man looked up, his eyes red and startled. "Sorry, man," he mumbled. "I just had a really bad day." Ethan offered a small, knowing smile. "Yeah," he said softly. "I've had a few of those." A weak chuckle escaped the boy. "It's more than a day. I feel like I'm failing at everything. School, relationships, life. I just can't get anything right." Ethan looked out at the river, the setting sun painting streaks of orange and purple across the water. He remembered his own failures, the sting of rejection, the weight of disappointment. He thought about what he wished someone had told him back then. He turned back to the young man. "You know," Ethan began, his voice quiet but clear, "sometimes failing is just life's way of clearing space for something better. It's knocking down the old walls so you can build something new. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. Nobody does. Just take one honest step, that's it. One small, real step in a new direction. That's how real change begins." The young man listened, truly listened. The tension in his shoulders seemed to loosen just a little. He nodded slowly, a flicker of light returning to his eyes. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I really needed that." Ethan smiled again, a genuine smile this time. And in that moment, a surprising realization washed over him. In trying to offer a lifeline to a stranger, he had found one for himself. He needed to hear those words just as much as the boy did. That night, for the first time in months, Ethan felt a familiar pull. He sat down at his old wooden desk, the one that had been a witness to so much of his frustration, and he started to write. But this time, it was different. He wasn't chasing success or trying to write a bestseller. He was just writing. He wrote about moments. Real, raw human moments. He wrote about the quiet desperation of feeling lost and the unexpected grace of a connection with a stranger. He wrote about the young man by the river. He wrote about the incredible courage it takes just to get out of bed some mornings. He wrote about the profound beauty of not giving up even when every fiber of your being wants to. He poured his own struggle and his newfound hope onto the page. When he was done, he gave it a title, The Storm Before the Rise. With a deep breath and zero expectations, he posted it online and went to sleep. When Ethan woke up the next morning, his phone was buzzing nonstop. His story had gone viral. It wasn't just liked or shared. It was being felt. Thousands of people from every corner of the globe were sharing it. But it wasn't the numbers that caught Ethan's breath. It was the comments. This is exactly what I needed to read today. Your words gave me hope. Thank you for making me feel less alone. This made me cry, but in a good way. It reminded me to believe again. People were sharing their own stories of storms and rises. Ethan read comment after comment, and a slow, deep smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of viral fame. It was the smile of a man who had finally found what he had lost, his purpose. His words had meaning again because they were connecting with people, helping them, reminding them that they weren't alone in their struggles. The story opened new doors. In the weeks that followed, invitations started trickling in. Not from big publishers or famous talk shows, but from small schools, local community centers, and heartfelt podcasts. They all wanted to hear his story. At first, Ethan was hesitant. Who was he to give advice? But then he remembered the boy on the bench. He remembered the power of a shared story. So he accepted. He stood in front of small crowds and spoke into microphones, not as a guru or an expert who had made it, but simply as Ethan, a man who had been broken by life and had chosen day by day to keep moving. He spoke with honesty and vulnerability, sharing his darkest moments and the sparks of light that helped him through. He didn't offer easy answers or five-step plans to happiness. He just told his truth. And in every speech, at every event, he shared one line that became his core message. A line that had come to define his own journey. He would look out at the faces in the audience and say, "You can't control when life breaks you, but you can always decide what you'll do next." And every single time he said it, he felt its power resonating not just in the room, but inside himself. It was a profound, grounding truth. Looking back, Ethan realized something incredible. Through sharing his story, through connecting with others in their pain, through offering the words he himself needed to hear, he had undergone a quiet transformation. He had become the man he once so desperately needed. He had found his way not by avoiding the storm, but by walking through it and then turning back to help guide others through theirs. And that, he knew, was a success far greater than any bestseller. So if you're out there today feeling lost, feeling like you're failing, remember Ethan's story. Remember that your struggle doesn't define you. Your breaking point isn't the end. It can be a beginning. The next step, no matter how small, is yours to take. Your story has power. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Take care. Ethan never imagined that one story, one night of honest writing from the heart could change so many lives. What started as a desperate whisper to himself had become a spark for thousands of others. But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. This was just the beginning. Because change isn't a single decision, it's a climb. And the higher you go, the stronger the wind becomes. It all began simply. Invitations trickled in small speaking events, podcast interviews, even a local newspaper article titled, "The Man Who Walked Away to Find Himself." At first, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't a motivational speaker. He wasn't a life coach. He was just a man trying to figure things out, just like everyone else. But something inside him whispered, maybe that's exactly why people need to hear from you. So he accepted one invitation, a small college in Oregon. The hall was modest, holding maybe 100 students. Standing on that stage, his palms were sweating as he stared out at a sea of curious faces. He took a deep breath and said the first thing that came to his mind, "I don't have all the answers. But I do know what it feels like to wake up one morning and realize you've been living someone else's life." The audience fell silent. You could feel the air shift in the room. For the next 30 minutes, he just spoke his truth. He talked about the fear, the failures, the small moments of courage, and that one night he finally decided to change everything. When he finished, there was a moment of quiet, a stillness that felt more powerful than any noise. Then a wave of applause washed over him, so strong it made him tremble. Afterward, A young woman approached him, her eyes filled with tears. She said, "Your story. It gave me the courage to walk away from something that's been killing me inside."
Thank you.
That single moment changed Ethan more than any applause ever could. In that instant, he realized something profound. Maybe my pain wasn't a punishment, maybe it was preparation. He understood that his struggles weren't just for him. They were a roadmap he could share with others who felt just as lost. As the months passed, Ethan's message began to spread like wildfire. His blog traffic exploded, his speaking engagements multiplied, and letters and emails started pouring in from all over the country. People were connecting with his story on a deeply personal level. But with this rapid growth came a different kind of pressure. He started traveling, constantly sleeping in airports, skipping meals, and running on fumes. He was burning out all over again. He caught himself slipping back into the very same trap he thought he had escaped, chasing approval, running on empty, trying to be everything to everyone. The cycle was repeating itself, just with a different goal. One night, in a cheap motel room after a long and draining event, he looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. The dark circles under his eyes, the deep lines of exhaustion, the profound loneliness, it was all there. He whispered to his reflection, "You promised yourself you wouldn't lose you again." And that night, he made another decision, one that was just as important as the first. He decided, "I will build success without losing my peace." He knew that helping others couldn't come at the cost of destroying himself. There had to be a better way. A few weeks later, a chance encounter changed everything. Ethan met an older man named Samuel Harper, a retired author and philanthropist who had quietly attended one of his talks. After the event, Samuel approached him with a kind but knowing look. "Your words are powerful, young man," he said. "But you're still running like the man you used to be." Ethan was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Samuel smiled gently. "You've learned to escape the cage, but you're still afraid to stop running. You need to learn to walk with purpose, not with panic." Those words hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. They stayed with him for days. Samuel became a quiet mentor, teaching him the art of slowing down, of being intentional, of serving others without self-destructing. He taught Ethan to set boundaries, to value rest as much as work, and to find strength in stillness. One sunny afternoon, while they were sitting in a park, Samuel said something that crystallized everything for Ethan. "The world doesn't need more people chasing success, Ethan. It needs more people who have found peace and are willing to share it." That was the moment it all clicked. Success without peace is just another kind of prison. The applause, the followers, the recognition, none of it mattered if he was empty inside. His real mission wasn't just to inspire people to change their lives, but to show them how to do it sustainably, with joy and inner calm. He realized his journey wasn't just about escaping a life he hated. It was about building a life he truly loved, a life filled with purpose, connection, and most importantly, peace. And that was a message worth sharing with the world. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your own path. We'll see you in the next one. Inspired, Ethan started something new, a small organization he called The Change Within. The mission was simple: help people rediscover themselves through honesty, healing, and hope. He wasn't aiming for massive auditoriums or sold-out arenas. Instead, he began hosting free workshops, small and intimate gatherings where real connection could happen. In these safe spaces, people weren't just attendees. They were individuals with stories. They shared their pain, their struggles, their deepest fears, and also their forgotten dreams. In those rooms, you could feel the transformation. Tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from release. Laughter echoed, genuine and unforced, as strangers realized they weren't alone in their battles. Walls came down, and in their place, a sense of family was built. Ethan's role had changed completely. He no longer stood on a stage, separated from the crowd by a spotlight. He sat with them, on the same level, sharing in their vulnerability. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't offer empty platitudes or quick fixes. He simply offered his presence, his empathy, and a safe space to just be. Through this process, he discovered the secret to true, lasting change. It wasn't about shouting motivational slogans from a pedestal. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations overnight. He realized, you don't change the world by shouting at it. You change it by loving people who've forgotten how to love themselves. It was about the quiet, gentle work of helping someone see their own worth again, one person at a time. It was about reigniting the spark of hope that had long been extinguished. Each person who left his workshop carried that spark with them, ready to share its warmth with others. Years passed, and the ripples of Ethan's work spread far beyond those small rooms. The change within grew from a handful of people to a community of thousands. His message resonated because it was authentic. He wasn't selling a product. He was sharing a part of himself. Eventually, he wrote a book, pouring all his experiences, his failures, and his learnings onto the pages. He titled it, "The Day I Decided to Change My Life." It wasn't launched with a massive marketing campaign. It found its way into the hands of readers through word of mouth, from one person telling another, "You have to read this." The book became a quiet bestseller, not because it topped the charts for a week, but because it stayed on them, a steady presence, a constant source of comfort for those who needed it. It was the kind of book people kept by their bedside, with dog-eared pages and highlighted passages. Yet, despite the success, Ethan never forgot where it all began. He never forgot the version of himself who was trapped in that dark apartment, feeling utterly broken and alone. He never forgot the weight of that despair or the single terrifying decision to step out into the light. One crisp afternoon, he found himself drawn back to the very park bench where his journey had started. The air was cool, carrying the familiar sounds of the city, a symphony of life that he once couldn't hear. He sat down, the worn wood of the bench feeling like an old friend. A soft smile touched his lips as the memory washed over him, not with pain, but with a profound sense of gratitude. He looked at the skyline, no longer seeing it as a symbol of what he had to conquer, but as a backdrop to the life he had reclaimed. He whispered to himself, the words carried away by the breeze, "I made it." Not to the top, but back to myself. That was the real victory. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed a young woman sitting on a nearby bench. Her shoulders were slumped, and she was crying quietly, trying to hide her face from the world. He recognized the look in her eyes, that same sense of being lost in a storm, with no land in sight. His heart went out to her. The old Ethan might have walked past, too absorbed in his own pain. The motivational speaker Ethan might have prepared a speech. But the real Ethan, the one who had found his way back, simply walked over gently. He didn't want to startle her, so he kept his voice low and kind. "Are you okay?" he asked. She looked up, startled, and quickly wiped her tears, shaking her head. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I just feel like my life's falling apart." Ethan didn't offer solutions or advice. He simply sat beside her, leaving a comfortable space between them, and said softly, "Maybe it's not falling apart. Maybe it's falling into place." The words hung in the air for a moment. He wasn't trying to be profound. He was just sharing the truest thing he knew. Her eyes, wide with surprise, met his. And then something shifted. A faint, fragile smile appeared on her lips. It wasn't a solution to her problems, but it was a flicker of light in her darkness. It was a glimmer of hope. In that exact moment, watching that small smile bloom on her face, Ethan understood everything. The day he decided to change his life wasn't just his turning point. It wasn't a story that ended with his own peace and success. That single decision, made on his darkest day, was just the beginning. It was the first stone dropped into a still pond, creating a ripple. That ripple touched the people in his workshops, who then created their own ripples. It flowed through the pages of his book, touching readers he would never meet. And now, it had reached this young woman on a park bench. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was a ripple that would never, ever stop. His life's purpose wasn't to be a star, but to be the light that helps others find their own way home. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this journey. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that we hope will inspire and uplift you. Remember, even the smallest change can start the biggest ripple. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one. Time has a strange, almost cruel way of testing us. It can stretch a single moment of pain into what feels like a lifetime, yet compress years of hard-fought effort into a fleeting second of meaning. For Ethan Cole, that 1 second arrived exactly 15 years after the day he quit his job. 15 years after the day he stood in his cramped office, looked at the life he had built, and whispered to himself, "Enough. I'm changing my life." Today he was standing on a stage, not in a sterile corporate hall under the blinding lights of ego, but at a gathering called the Change Within Global Summit. It was a movement he had unknowingly built from that single, quiet act of courage. The banners hanging around the open-air venue didn't just shout words like success or wealth. They spoke a different language. They said purpose, peace, people. And as Ethan looked out at the thousands of faces before him, young, old, some broken, some healed, all listening, he had a profound realization. He wasn't the center of this story anymore. They were. What began as one man's desperate decision to save himself had become a global wave of transformation. The change within had spread across continents, manifesting not as a brand, but as a living, breathing network of human connection. There were community programs in bustling cities, counseling centers in quiet suburbs, scholarships for students who dared to dream, and youth workshops teaching one simple, powerful truth. You don't need a perfect plan to start. You just need an honest decision. The stories were everywhere, a beautiful mosaic of human resilience. A single mother in Detroit, inspired by Ethan's journey, had started a shelter for women leaving abusive relationships. A retired teacher in a remote village in India had created a mobile library, a reading program for children living in poverty. A soldier who had once contemplated ending his own life after returning from war was now a celebrated mentor for veterans, helping them find their footing back home. Now, standing on that stage, with his hair silvered by time and his voice deeper, richer with the weight of experience, Ethan didn't speak like a guru giving a lecture. He spoke like a man remembering home. He leaned into the microphone, and his voice was soft, intimate, as if he were speaking to each person individually. I used to think that changing your life meant escaping your old one, he began. I thought you had to run, to erase the past, to become someone completely new. But it doesn't work that way. He paused, letting the words settle. True change means forgiving who you were. It means thanking who you've become. And it means trusting with every fiber of your being who you are still becoming. A heavy, beautiful silence fell over the crowd. It was the kind of silence that happens when hearts are listening instead of just ears. He continued, his voice trembling just slightly with the memory. 15 years ago, I sat in a small, empty apartment. I was terrified, I was broken, and I was so tired. I honestly thought my life was over, but that night, I made a decision. It wasn't a grand plan. It was just a promise to myself. I decided that my story wasn't going to end like that. He looked out, making eye contact with people in the front rows. And I learned something incredibly powerful in the years that followed. The moment you decide to change, the universe starts to move things in your favor. It's not magic. It's not a secret formula. It's because you finally believe that you deserve better. Your belief is the force that moves mountains. Tears started to shimmer in his eyes, reflecting the stage lights. And if you're sitting here today or watching this from home and you're wondering if it's too late for you, if you think you've made too many mistakes or that your chance has passed, I need you to hear me. His voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. It is not too late. The best day of your life, the first chapter of your real story, can begin the moment you decide it will. The applause that followed wasn't just noise. It was a release, a collective exhale of hope. It was the same kind of river where, so many years ago, he had sat and talked with a lost young man, giving him the advice he himself needed to hear. He stood there now, older, wiser, and completely at peace. The lights of the city reflected on the water's surface, flickering like a galaxy of stars brought down to earth. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. He looked at his reflection in the dark water, at the silver-haired man looking back at him, and he whispered into the quiet night, just for himself. You did it, Ethan. You became the change. When the event ended, Ethan stepped outside alone. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and a palpable sense of hope. He found himself walking toward the nearby river, a place that felt hauntingly familiar. It was just like the river where, years ago, he had sat with a lost young man offering words he barely believed himself. Now, standing on the bank, he was older, wiser, and finally at peace. The city lights shimmered on the water's surface, like a galaxy of stars brought down to earth. A soft smile touched his lips as he whispered to the gentle current, You did it, Ethan. You became the change. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope was simple, the handwriting inside a little shaky, full of raw emotion. It was from a 17-year-old boy named Liam, all the way from Ohio. "Dear Mr. Cole," it began, "I stumbled upon your story by accident. To be honest, I was going to give up that night. I felt like there was nothing left for me. But something in your words, something in your journey, it stopped me. It made me think that maybe my story isn't over yet. I still don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but for the first time in a long time, I know I want to try again. Thank you for helping me decide to change my life too. Sincerely, Liam." Ethan folded the letter with gentle, careful hands, his eyes misty. He walked over to a wooden box on his shelf, a box overflowing with hundreds of similar letters. Each one told a story of despair turned into hope, of a life touched and transformed by his journey. He placed Liam's letter among them, a new testament to the power of a shared struggle. Looking at the collection of stories, he whispered to himself, "This is the real success. Not the fame, not the money. But these lives changed, all because I refused to give up on my own." Years passed, and Ethan's story became a beacon, told and retold in books, films, and classrooms around the world. People from all walks of life were inspired by his incredible transformation. Whenever he spoke, during interviews or at gatherings, he was almost always asked the same question: "What was the hardest part of your journey?" And without hesitation, he always gave the same, simple answer: starting. He would elaborate, explaining that the journey of 1,000 miles truly begins with a single, often terrifying step. It's not the 10th step or the 100th that's the most difficult, he'd say. It's that very first one. The one you take when no one believes in you, when you might not even believe in yourself. It's the moment you choose to move forward into the unknown, fueled by nothing but a flicker of hope. But once you take that first step, everything changes. The universe begins to conspire in your favor, and you start building momentum you never thought possible. His message was a powerful reminder that the greatest obstacle is often our own inertia, our own fear of beginning. The first step is an act of faith, a declaration that you are worth the effort. It's the moment you defy doubt and choose action. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep many years later, the world mourned. Not for a celebrity, but for a man who had given hope a face, a name, a story. He showed everyone that it was possible to climb out of the darkest pits. His legacy wasn't in his fame, but in the countless lives he had unknowingly saved. In a journal found by his bedside, his final words were written simple, profound, and timeless. Change begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to save you, and decide to save yourself. And so the ripple effect he started continued to spread, long after he was gone. One person after another, in different cities, countries, and across generations, would find themselves at a crossroads. They would hear his story, read his words, and feel a new resolve stirring within them. And in the quiet of their own hearts, they would whisper the same powerful words to themselves. Today, I decide to change my life. This story isn't just about Ethan. It's about the Ethan in all of us. It's about that spark of potential that lies dormant, waiting for us to take that first, difficult step. It is a reminder that your own journey of healing and growth can become a lighthouse for others lost in the storm. You never know who is watching, who is listening, who might be inspired by your courage to simply start. So if you're standing at your own crossroads, feeling lost or hopeless, remember Ethan, remember Liam. Remember that the most powerful force for change in your life is you. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to begin. Take that first step. The rest will follow. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this community. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that aims to inspire and uplift. Your journey matters,